Well, hello there, everyone. A show right here. I'm talking about for guarantee. What does it usually mean when we guarantee something? And it could mean something such as to where, like, if it's the same thing as a promise, or if we're talking about is as to where, like, something like a deposit. And a lot of times it sure seems that way. That's basically what it is. It means for a deposit. And if you also want to look at it as to where it's another way of how you want to show is to where a promise. Or I'm like, oh, so yeah, a lot of times it's like, you might see that to where whenever if you're trying to take care of a bill, or maybe if it's a credit card payment or some sort like that, then a lot of times it's like, yeah, deposits, mainly for deposits, but what does that usually mean whenever you guarantee something? And so it seems like to me though that yeah, that first of all, you talk about for deposits that what does it usually mean whenever somebody says as to where that if you're trying to get a bill transfer or something clarified on a bill statement or like on an invoice, and a lot of times it sure seems that way that it's like most of everybody else would say is to where deposit is required for that reason. A deposit is required just because that yeah, that according to, I'm like, yeah, credit approval, or it could also be other reasons too. But let's just say though, like for a deposit, that a deposit is just another way of how you want to cause this toward it. Yeah, pay up front forward. Pay up forward, and so it sure seems that way toward it. It's kind of like that toward it. You go ahead and show us to where, yeah, if you got cash on hand and you pay up front, and then after that the next month, and you would pay for whatever the bill says. And so it sure seems that way that most bills though that would require you to make a deposit, especially if you're transferring service. And a lot of times almost everybody else would probably wonder as to where the why do companies do that a lot of times. And it's like, yeah, that so so some of those deposits that could even be more than maybe from what the bill was previously billed as. And so that's why it sure seems that way to where that everybody else are going to be like whenever you pay a bill. And let's just say if you call and get a bill transferred to your name, or get something changed on the account on the bill or something like that, then companies are going to charge you a little bit more. And especially if we're talking about yeah, contract agreements, and also about other billing statements. And so yeah, that if there's anything if there's any source of change on the bill, especially. But talk about for guarantee. And so basically whenever you guarantee something that it's keeping our words. And so I guess another way of how some companies, credit companies will probably say too that that's another way of how we want to keep our word toward it, guaranteed to get the job done. It's another way of how you want to stay is toward like a promise. But a lot of times that what I usually see though is that yeah, that a deposit is asked, and also about talking about for guarantees. So let's just say if you're not 100% satisfied with the order of the process and all that, and then that's a lot of times to say that yeah, we'll go ahead and refund your money, and then send you a gift if this option didn't work best for you, and then we'll refund your money. So a lot of times it's like most if you want to kind of call it like for credit associates and other companies that say is to word it, yeah, I guarantee for your money back if not satisfied, but still that. So I know a lot of times that it sure seems that way that when we're talking about you know when we're talking about taking care of bills and managing the finances and all that, that you're talking about a lot of times it's like, yeah, that whenever you look at the bills and go through the paperwork and everything, yeah, it sure seems that way. That what does it usually mean whenever you guarantee something? And almost everybody else might say too that will guarantee basically means a limited time only. I'm like, well, I don't, it don't really mean limited time only. What it means is that yeah, that if you are not satisfied with the service, then here's what we'll do. We'll go ahead, we'll refund money. But so yeah, kind of pay it fair and square. I guess if you want to kind of call it that a little bit too, pay it fair and square. So I know whenever you're trying to negotiate with some of these companies, it sure seems that way to where that not only are they going to say is to where if you're trying to get the bills switched around to where put a bill in your name, transfer the billing status and all that, and it sure seems that way to where that yeah that not only are you having to fill out the paperwork and all that, but then also you may have to come up with a deposit. And so it sure seems that way that some of these companies are going to require you to make a deposit for that reason. And we're talking about that deposit could be up to 40% on top of maybe what the bill could have been. So let's just say that if we're talking about like, yeah, if the bill originally was, maybe 75 or maybe $120 or something like that. So a lot of times it sure seems that way that yeah, deposits. And so how many of us can maybe think about that to where most deposits though, when are they required and why are they required? Well, it sure seems that way that well, if some may think it's to work, an arm and a leg, ain't it? But still, if we're talking about for a deposit though, that it sure seems that way that yeah that you are paying more upfront, and so let's just say that yeah that deposit could be more than what you paid for the last time, and especially if you're trying to get the bill information transferred to your name or trying to get if you're trying to make a change on the account. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact about whenever there's an update or a change on the account, and then that change may not be effect may not come effect until about after 48 hours or so later. So it sure seems that way to where that yeah that most deposits would be required, and like I say, is toward it. But still, that there might be some times that yeah, you pay more now, but then you'll be credited from the following bill. So a lot of times, that some of these companies might say too is that yeah, if you go paperless, number one, but then also is that if you come up with money up front now, and then yeah, then we'll credit you for the following month. So it sure seems that like a time period, and so it sure seems that way that yeah that whenever if you're trying to get the billing status and everything all changed and trying to work that out with the billing status, it sure seems that way to where that everybody else might think too is to where you feel like that you paid more last time than compared to how much you paid this time, and then for the following month. So we're talking about between maybe now and April that we're talking about that if your bills are maybe going to be skyrocketing high just a little bit, or maybe sometimes a certain time in month that they'll be going, they'll be lowering. But a lot of times, though, it sure seems that way to where that, well, really, though, if you make a deposit, and a lot of times it's like, yeah, well, some companies say is to where that whenever we get your deposit, we'll credit you for the following month of the bill, but just pay for what's remaining. And so, yeah, I don't really know if maybe that the personal property tax works the same way. And like everybody else say, probably say too, if we're talking about taxes that and some of them that do require a deposit of some sort. But really, though, to talk about for guarantee, though, that I guess it's another way of how you want to cause this tour, like insurance. If it's a promise to do a good job, then more customers and more clients are going to want to go ahead and use the service. And of course, that there's that there's like another way of how companies will probably say too that yeah, well, we have our insurance is to where if you're not 100% satisfied for what you got during the first 30 days that you tried, or during the first couple of weeks that you were in the service, and that you were using their service, and that yeah, I guarantee for your money back. So a lot of times it's like yeah, I guarantee that this will work. And so I know a lot of these companies might say too that yeah, most of them have been in business for over 40 years, but how many of us really want to take time to hear that? I'm like, well, really, companies, most companies would say too that we've been in business for 40 years, and that we can guarantee that we can get the job done. But how many of us will probably say is to where that really what you would probably like to hear though is to where that if anything is to where that yeah, one way of how you want to be satisfied is to where they don't put me on hold, to give me the assistance immediately. And so some customers might say that whenever I call and I like to speak to somebody, then I don't like being put on hold. And a lot of times, like everybody else might say too, that whenever you call and negotiate with some of these companies, it sure seems that way that some of them are going to either put you on hold, or some of them that may get back to you maybe 10 days later, and not everybody likes that. So it sure seems that way to where that if we're talking about guarantee here, that a lot of times it seems like it all goes by a response. Yeah, well, we need to respond. I'm like, yeah, for how long it takes just to get a response from somebody there at the from from an agent, somebody there at the office. And so that's why it sure seems that way to where guarantees just another way of how do you want to show is like top up for insurance. And so it sure seems that way to where that whenever we're talking about commercial advertisements, and if we're talking about the other companies that like I say too, is to where that whenever they talk about that, yeah, I'm sure we've all heard of them about is this toward that like on the apps though that if you try to get approved a credit card or a loan, but we're talking about every time we think about that. I'm like every time I think about that, I also keep thinking too that in case if anybody that may say that, well, can we really stretch our money for anywhere it goes, huh? Can we really stretch our money? But I just really think though that number one, that you are basically are counting on somebody else's service just to take care of something. And let's just say if it's extra assistance or anything else that you may not quite understand about how the service works and all that, but whenever the company or business or whoever it is that says guarantee, though, that's another way of how you want to cause is toward it that yeah, it's another way of how they want to promise. They want to show good, honesty, loyalty to a lot of their customers. So I'm sure most companies are doing that, where that they'll tell you that you're guaranteed to do the job and do the job, get the job done and get it done right. And so that's why it sure seems that way to where that whenever we're talking about, if it's credit card companies or if it's, interest, or anything like that, that yeah, that you try it out, but still, that I just really think too that for how some of so how the calls are handled too, and so other than like other sales calls, that they'll just send you a bunch of paperwork about it within 3 business days that you call them, and they'll explain to you about what they do and all that. And so let's just say though that yeah, well, some places that don't explain to you very well about the details about something, but half the time it's like, whenever you call and get information, all that, especially maybe if it is from your insurance company. And it sure seems that way to where whenever we're talking about guaranteed, that where the instructions followed as it was supposed to be. And so it sure seems that way to where that yeah, well, guaranteed that if you are not 100% satisfied, but almost everybody else will probably say too that yeah, well, if I didn't get anything in the mail, how satisfied maybe I would be, like so, yeah. So let's just say if a phone call only lasts for about 15 minutes, and then find out you get something in the mail within 4 business days, and they'll tell you that they don't explain everything to you. But I just really think too, though, that it's like yeah, that the step one of the process, that whenever you do make that phone call, whenever you do complete that paperwork and all that, and it sure seems that way to where that the step forward in the process, that whenever you're on the telephone with some of these credit on my consultants, if you want to kind of call it. And so let's just say if you're going to be on the phone with some of these people, and sometimes it's like, yeah, that you're able to talk over the phone with them, but then of course that maybe you might even connect with them, maybe on Skype or Messenger or whichever app that you're using, and they'll probably tell you, like something like, oh, yeah, that just to kind of get a better idea about what the situation is, any sorts of verification cards or anything like that that's asked for. And for most of the time, with most meetings that I have done, and I can tell everybody here too, most of the time, and even if it's a doctor's appointment, it sure seems that way. If you're trying to show them something that it's really hard for them to look at, the stuff, like yeah, a lot of that stuff that apply, like, such as links to your portfolio, or if it's a business card that you have the phone right here, and a lot of times it's like people probably thinking too is that well, this is not acceptable because all I see is just a blank screen or whichever you want to call it, where it's not popping up. And so that's whenever that people may say is to where, well, really, is that better? But anyway, I just really think though that whenever it comes to taking care of a situation, though, it sure seems that way to where that number one though, that a lot of you know companies would ask you to make a deposit, and like almost everybody else will probably say too, is that whenever it comes to talking to like consulting agents and other anybody else like those who are willing to assist you, and it sure seems that way to where that you hear about that almost all the time about what does it usually mean to guarantee. And so it's another way of how you want to cause this toward it. Yeah, we'll refund your money. I'm like, for if this does not work out for you, then I'm like guarantee. I'm like, so yeah, it's another way of how do you want to say, yeah, keep your fingers crossed. I guess that's another one. I'm like, yeah, it's like a promise. And but I just really think too though that yeah, that almost anything that you're going to be working on, no, it seems like to me, though, that, yeah, well, they say that even during the meetings, yeah, we'll take care of everything for you. Don't worry about it. Check back, in 2 days. It's really should, and I think it really should be about doing our own fair share of the work, everybody. Like a number of times that I've you based on from my experience, though, I don't really see that toward it that they'll take care of everything, and if anything, that it seems like to me though that they're always going to blame their customers or clients for a misunderstanding or whatever you want to call it. But I just really think too, though, that yeah, that whenever you make a call or follow up about something, it sure seems that way. That you got people who are on the phone like, hey, you're supposed to get back to us on the Monday morning. And like, listen, man, okay, your email, and so a lot of times it sure seems that way that if you pick up the phone and then you're likely looking at the phone like that, and just like I say, that within maybe 48 hours, and then it's possible that there's going to be this hand that's going to be popping out of the screen and being like I say this to her. That it's like, yeah, that is your responsibility to send out the forward us the proof. And then you're like, well, I'm about ready to say this toward it. Half the time, I don't know if I'm talking to a mirror, if I'm talking to someone, but just knowing as to where that I'm not responsible for everything. Okay, so the way I think about too, though, is that really though, that I got this phone for a reason. Okay, I didn't get it to just think about it as to where to have a little temperature to be popping on the screen just like that, and to be, I say, knowing about wanting to slap it across the face and being like, even if it is, an hour later or whichever you want to call it, okay, we do our fair share, okay. I'm not responsible for everything. So a lot of times it sure seems that way that whenever it comes to talking to our phone, and like anybody say, it seems like it was not too long ago that it feels like talking to a calculator, doesn't it? In case of anybody that may say this to her, how many of us will probably thinking too is to her that with our phones like these right here, that if you get mad enough, how often do you feel like you're talking to a calculator? Like, yeah, round up the digits, man. Round up the digits, man. You know, yeah, well, where's the deposit? But the way I think about though is that yeah, whenever it comes to taking care of the bills and other paperwork though, it's like really, what does guarantee basically mean? Well, how many of us are going to maybe say that that's a guarantee that the no slapping across the face or whichever you want to call it on a sticker? But the way I think about those, like, yeah, for slapping across the face. But the way I think about though is that it sure seems that way to where that whenever it comes to taking care of bills or whichever you want to call it, it's like, yeah, you're looking at all those documents and everything, and it sure seems that way as to where that that one Monday morning, well, that's your responsibility to take care of that, sir. Like you like say, like, well, I'll tell you one thing though is that maybe my responsibility is providing the information about for what might go. Yeah, if we're talking about maybe account transfer or something like that, but still, in case of anybody that may want to know too, is to where the back in the old days, like I say, if you want to look at the calculator like that, and you round up those digits, and a lot of times you got to say too is to where that if you're trying to do your math work and find out that you get a phone call, they say it's like talk about, yeah, we want to let you know that you've been approved. The way I think about though is that whenever it comes to deposits and guarantee though, and a lot of times it sure seems that way. Like everybody else will probably ask the same question as to where to guarantee to stay posted as to where keep the calculator handy. So let's just say if you can hold a calculator, keep it handy for at least a couple of days. And I guess you could say too is to where that you have the possibility that that's going to say is to guarantee to get the job done. Just by holding a phone like this, like holding the calculator. But it sure seems that way though that when we're talking about something about the size of a calculator right here, and you're likely want to know too, is that holding a calculator compared to holding a typewriter though, or a word processor, or something that to where you're keeping track of all the data and all the digits and everything. And a lot of times it sure seems that way to where that the best way of how to explain about guarantee though, and like almost every company will probably say to you, what I know what guarantee means? It means that we explain how we come up with our answers. That's what guarantee means. This how it explains. We explain to you what we do at our associates, and and then talk about other companies. If we explain what we do here at our business, at our offices, and then that's guaranteed. We explain to you very well on how it works, and it sure seems that way. That's pretty much like for most companies to say that's how what they do. You'll guarantee, but other than what you call talking about for $5 or whichever you call it, but let's just say that people may think as to where that really that if $5 is supposed to be a prize or anything like that, but I just really think though that guarantee also means, man, is that yeah, that if you provide true and accurate information on the application, especially that it's like guarantee that yeah, the process will go faster. If you be honest with them, but I just really think too that when we're talking about trying to take care of a job, though, it sure seems that way to where that yeah, that by the time you by the time you sign up and by the time you get that bill, getting the bill, of course, everything seems to be so totally different. Even when after you just buy a car or a home or something like that, it sure seems that way. That the getting a bill is just so totally different. Why is that the case? Well, number one, that you might be expecting the bill to be so much, and compared to whenever you open up that bill and find out it's something different. So it sure seems that way that if you round up the digits on the calculator and by the time you get the bill and then it says something else. But I just really think though that yeah, that whenever you do get any sorts of documents or any sorts of papers of the matter, it sure seems that way. The first thing that you look at first is toward it, making sure whose name it's. I'm like, oh, yeah, and then knowing about that, just to kind of give you an idea about. So yeah, a lot of times it may seem like as toward that, yeah, that you want to look at the bill for that reason. And let's just say if it is a dental bill, I'm like, yeah, medical bill or dental bill. Almost everybody else would probably thinking too is to where that if they know what the dental bill says, usually it's your insurance companies. I guess that the most of the time it's the insurance company that gets the bills, the medical bills or dental bills. But let's just say if you did were able to get a copy of that same bill from your insurance. And you're probably thinking too that whenever you do get the bill, it's like, yeah, that by the time you go into the office or anywhere, and then by the time you get a bill, and you're pretty surprised on how much you're charged for. And so that's why almost everybody else will probably say too that yeah, that whenever you do get a bill, that the whole experience though, it's like, yeah, that whenever you do take care of something, that it's like, well, really, that it seems like it's always the question to her why you were charged, and especially if it's shipping and handling, and especially if it's service fees or state taxes or something like that. And so that's why it sure seems that way. That most of the time, whenever you do get a bill, I try to look at it as toward it just to kind of give you an idea about what was done. And so a lot of times it's like, yeah, whenever you do get a bill, a lot of times you don't want to think too much about what still needs to be done. Try to think about what has already been done. So let's just say if it's the phone call to the credit associate, or if it's yeah, calling the customer service. So a lot of times it sure seems that way, that they try to focus on the fact about is to what has been done already. And let's just say that yeah, well, that bill was reinstated just because there was a change on the account law. So when we talk about guarantee, though, like guarantee could probably mean a number of things. But one of those things, of course, is to where maybe going to show is to where, yeah, well, if you make a deposit or something like that. So yeah, most of the time, whenever you do pay a bill, if it's online or if you do make a payment over the phone, that if you do make a deposit, that a lot of times that companies do ask you to make a deposit, and almost everybody else will probably say, like on Friday night, that why is it that the companies would ask you to make a deposit? But I guess it seems like, yeah, almost all the time that they're going to ask you to pay more up front, especially if there's a change in the billing status. Anything that's going to be recorded, and so that's why it sure seems that way. That yeah, that you pay more, from that first time if you had to transfer the bill, to your like you make a correction on the bill, and you would have to pay a deposit. And buying a car, especially, if you're buying a car, or maybe if you're trying to invest into buying a home in the near future, it sure seems that way, that that's the case. And especially if it's taking care of your taxes. And half the time, it sure seems that way, that when we're talking about a deposit, though, that means that money's going in. But like almost all companies would say, is toward it that that money needs to go in and stay in. It can't come out. And I know that seems to be hard to do, by the way, but it sure seems that way. To talk about for guarantee, and so it sure seems that way, that yeah, that probably thinking too is toward it, yeah, that one way of how to invest in money, especially. But if we're talking about is to where that the same thing with the amount of savings that could be saved, using the phone. So let's just say that if you have like a a code, if you have like a security code, or maybe even the lock, extra lock protection or something like that, powered on from the phone right here. And like everybody else will probably say too, is toward it. That the money is on there, maybe just because that you haven't figured out on how to spend it, or if anything, yeah, it's in savings. But still, if you keep that amount of money invested for a certain period of time, and we're talking about, yeah, for 100 days. And so I that seems to be correct. Now it's like, for the first 100 days, if you can save so much money, if you can keep so much money in your pocket. And like everybody else is probably thinking too, is that yeah, you put money in your pocket and you may forget about it later on. How is that possible? Well, I tell you one thing, everybody. One thing I guess to remember is to where that yeah, especially if it's a gift card or if it's a Visa. And so if we're talking about a plastic card, yeah, a plastic card that has 500, that has maybe 100 or maybe $200 on there, And most of the time with most plastic cards, that yeah, you don't know how much money's on there because it's just a card. You really cannot tell because, like everybody else will probably say too, that a card is not the same thing as cash. But I'm like, well, really, the way I can maybe describe it is toward it that it's supposed to look like a savings. I'm like, oh yeah, that electronic card right there. There's money on there, but at the same time, people are probably thinking too is toward it, ways of how you can tell people that, number one, if you set maybe a few restrictions on that electronic card, then maybe it will be hard to spend it. Really, it would be really hard to spend any money on there. So let's just say that, like everybody else are probably thinking too, is to where if it's really hard to hang on to money like this for 100 days, that seems to be so hard to do. I'm like, what is so hard than compared to just knowing about is to where that, yeah, between how many days out of a week that does it take you just to dust a lamp or maybe just to vacuum the carpets or anything like that? And like almost everybody else are probably thinking too is to where compared to something like this to any other chores that you could probably think about that you usually do around the house. And one of them could also be cleaning the gutters, dusting the lamp, or vacuuming and mopping the floors. And you're probably thinking too is to where that really is 100 days really that long? Just to say is to where hang on to money and to investment. But the way I think about it too though it is to where that a number of times I looked at a lot of these apps and people thinking too is to where that yeah, well, you check to see how much is on the account, and then you might be surprised on how much is on there, especially if you earn any credits and earn any points. And still, I just really think though is to where whenever people say when companies say guarantee and talking about a deposit, that basically is toward a yeah, a deposit, and we all know too that some places when we're talking about deposit though, that basically means is toward another way of how you want to call it is toward insurance. If we're talking about a deposit for property or maybe for a rental car, we're talking about money that you pay up front, but then that money, of course, is used later on to pay for any damages, for any cost of repairs and all that. So I know most of the time that a deposit could also mean a number of things. But if we're talking about for most bills, though, we're talking about that a lot of times it's money up front, so you pay more this time, and then within maybe 3 months later, then you start paying less. And so some companies might work that way, by the way, and so it sure seems that way to where that some of us might think is to where okay, well, they ripped us off the last time because if I've done the math, we paid 220 up front the last time, and so let's just say that if you get a bill maybe within 2 months later you get a bill for maybe with a different amount. But so it sure seems that way to where that whenever we think about that, is that whenever it comes to guarantee though that it's like oh yeah that you and I know deposits are just a little bit different, but let's just say though that's another thing that I want to talk about too is that whenever it comes to deposits, because whenever you do, and let's just say if it is insurance, and maybe if it's paying, for your personal property tax, if you had to get, the title or something like that switched to, somebody, I'm like, oh yeah, if you do sell any properties, and then you may have to deal with a little bit of the similar thing, making a deposit, and then also getting everything clarified with the billing status and all that. And so that's why it sure seems that way that yeah, that whenever we're talking about a deposit, though, that you pay more this time. Since the beginning of the year, it seems like that you pay more this time, but then maybe by the spring that you'll pay less. So a lot of times it sure seems that way that holding up your phone is like holding a calculator. You're trying to round up all those digits, and want to know just a little bit too that some of those digits that could be different than compared to from the beginning of the year. But I just really think though that whenever it comes to understanding about guarantee, though, is that yeah, that we each have a job to do, and like anybody says that yeah, that whenever it comes to most credit, I'm like, yeah, credit associates and then also other companies that deal with debt matter, a lot of financial debt reasons and all that, and a lot of those companies that might say too is toward that we are willing to cut the bill in half if I'm like, so yeah, that you may have to show them verification of yeah, about what you credit, I'm like all that paperwork and all that, and so that's why it sure seems that way that yeah, they'll send you a packet of information for what they do, but it sure seems that way that yeah, that we stand by our service for what we do, and then it's another way of how you want to call us is towards another way of how to want a gift of appreciation toward things for subscribing to our company. And so yeah, almost everybody else might even say too that if you're following some of those credit associates, even on Facebook or even on LinkedIn or on Instagram and or on YouTube, and they're probably thinking too is that yeah, that if you have not yet subscribed to their channel, or but still that I just really think though that whenever it comes to guarantee though that I guess most companies will say is to where if that's the rule to where that if you're not 100% satisfied for what was provided, and then we'll offer you a full refund. So that's why it sure seems that way that a lot of companies would say that you're guaranteed, and it's another way of how you want to say is to where we promise you that we'll do our best. Anyway, thanks for watching everyone, and have a good day.